Welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to get the short block for mixed up boss torn down, and I'm going to tear down some big block Chevy heads so DV can get the porting. Stay tuned. What's going on, everybody? Welcome back. You know, when you come to DV's shop, you never really know what you're going to be getting into. You know, not every job is all glamorous, you know, such as this right here. We're tearing down a Brodix big block Chevrolet head. I think it's a big Brody, so that he can work his magic on the ports and valve seat. But this goes to show you how versatile we are at the shop here. Well, project number one is complete. We got all of the valves out of this head, and one thing I noticed, DV's gonna have some work cut out for him. If you look in there, you can see a hole. They've been broke through to head bolt hole, so yeah, DV's gonna have fun with these heads. Before I get into this teardown of this short block, first of all, I just want to wish all of the fathers out there happy Father's Day. It's Father's Day weekend, and while we're talking about that, I'm going to tell you a story about my father, and it involves tools, which is what we're dealing with here. When you look right here on the top of this toolbox, you see an array of different kinds of measuring devices. Okay, you've got all the way from the very inexpensive to the high dollar here. Stare. So, give you a little story about my dad. My dad he worked in a cotton mill his whole life, setting up machinery. They called them cards. He was a card grinder, and in doing so, he had to have some precision tools. And Dad was always a stare-it man. He had high regards for stare-it and their quality. And I'll never forget this. When I opened up my garage in 2008, you know, he told me when I was going to get into engine building, he said, Andy, he said, always remember this. You're only as good as the tool that you're using. And that just rang home with me. And so one of the first things that I got was this Starrett dial bore gauge. Now, out of all of these tools, I would say that you could get by with the cheap China tools pretty good in this deal. The China tools have come a long ways. But if you're going to spend good money on a measuring tool, this would be the one that I would buy, a bore gauge. And my reasoning for that is you can do your main bearing clearance, your rod bearing clearance, your bore to piston clearance. This is a very versatile tool, and it's important. You know, your oil clearances are very important when it comes to engine building, so I would prioritize this as number one. But if you can be proficient in using the snap gauge tools, you can be just as good as the accuracy as you can get here. I know some people would disagree with that, but I have met individuals who have used these enough that they can be within a couple tenths of a thousandth, and that is very tight tolerances, you know, considering what we're working with. But you know, and then also, if you're going to get an outside micrometer, you know, your 0 to 1 is pretty important, but the 2 to 3 seems to be the most one that I use. Why is that? Because it covers most of your domestic crankshaft journal diameters, and so, you know, and rod journals for that matter, unless you're doing some import stuff which are smaller than 2 inch, but the 2 to 3 outside micrometer will get you there. But just a little story about my dad, and it's Father's Day weekend, thought I would throw that in there. Now let's get started on the teardown of this short block. One thing that David and I are very particular about is this right here, is having a notebook, and when we're putting an engine together, documenting the actual bearing journal sizes, the clearances, every kind of specification that you can imagine, we will document it in this book. You know, and the reason why we do that is so that we have a running reference for down the road. You know, if an engine gets sold and someone wants to know the specifications on it, we have all of that documented. You know, and I highly suggest to anyone who's looking to build an engine, start out, get you a notebook so that you can document your progress along the way, because it can save you down the road. Okay, first things first. Before I get started on micing my crankshaft, the first thing I do is when I get my mic out of the box, make sure that you clean the mic itself right here on the contacts, because a little bit of grit or dirt can throw your measurements off. Second thing I do is I take the standard little anvil here, and I will take and just put it in here as reference and bring it in to see just what kind of tolerances we're working with the mic itself. Temperature will affect your micrometers. You holding it in your hand can change the reading, so you gotta be cautious about this. But luckily, it appears, let's see here. I'm gonna try to bring this in so you can see it. But when I compare the standard 2-inch little anvil here, and I slide it, come on now, hold my mouth right. Alright, tighten it up so that you can see right there, possibly, I don't know if it'll be clear, that it is actually dead on 0. And that's exactly what you're looking for. So we know that our outside micrometer is calibrated, so then we can begin the measuring process. Another thing is making sure that you have cleaned away any kind of grit or oil that may have been on the crankshaft, because that can throw your readings off. And what I do, and everybody has their own technique or way, if you will, is I will actually measure in multiple spots just to verify that I'm getting a good measurement. Okay. And this is something that just comes in time of developing the feel of an accurate measurement. Okay, this journal is 2.748 1. Okay. 2.748 1. And like I said, what I'm going to do is I'm going to come over here and I'm going to measure it on a different axis. Just to make sure, and considering this is a brand new crank from Scat, I don't expect to find anything out of the ordinary, because Scat they have some really good quality. Okay, so that measured dead on exactly the same. Alright, so I'll even go down and make sure. Now this is very important on an older crankshaft, to make sure that you don't have a taper situation. You know, if you're measuring a crankshaft that has ran and it's got a lot of miles on it, you definitely want to measure across the journal, because it will wear in a tapered pattern, and that's just something that you need to look out for. Exactly the same. Okay. And it's the same process. We keep going on down the line and documenting as we go. Next, I'm going to show you how we determine our bearing clearance using this measurement and using the dial bore gauge against this. This is a pretty neat tool right here. And basically, if you go online to anyone who deals in specialty measurement tools, you can find one of these mic holders. And I'm going to be using it to set up the dial bore gauge, and it's important because when you clamp your mic in that vise right there, you're taking out the temperature as a consistency variable there. So just something to keep in mind. Okay, we already know the dimension of our crankshaft main journal. And so what I've done is I've locked it down on that actual measurement. I'm going to put it in our mic vise right here and tighten it down, okay, and get it situated to where we can use the dial bore gauge and get it calibrated. Now, how we're going to get our bearing clearance is we're going to take good old dial bore gauge and set it up to read in that range. So you get your little chart out right here. All right, find the measurement that you're looking for, and we're looking for 2.740 because we're trying to read between those two numbers. Okay, it will tell you which anvil to use, which it's saying a K4. Okay, pick the K4 anvil out of here, and it'll be marked or etched on the back side of it there, 2.6. And then it's going to say that we need 120 thousandth spacer plus a 20 thousandth spacer to get where we need to be. So this is the 120 thousandth. Let me get it out of here. It's been a while since it's been used. Come on now. Alright, we take and slide the spacers over here just like that. We will unscrew this right here. Put our cap back on it. And you just want it snug. You don't want to crank it down with any kind of pliers or anything to that effect. Okay, so now we have the tool that's ready to be calibrated. And it's important when you're doing this to make sure that you're looking at it straight on, so you don't get an optical illusion. Just about there. It's a tedious process, but it's one worth doing. Alright. We have this thing dialed in exactly to 0. So now what we're going to do is take this to our main bearing bore on the block and measure the clearance with the bearings in place and the main cap torqued down. Alright, we got the main cap torqued down with the bearing in place, and so what we're going to do is measure in a couple different locations, just like we measured the crankshaft, because when you torque this cap down you have what's called bearing crush. And if you're not careful, you can have an oblong shaped bore there. So you always need to check it in multiple places. Come on now. Right at 3/1000 of an inch. Okay, so after measuring all of our main bearing journal bores, looks like we're around 29/10,000ths to right at 3/1000ths of an inch, which is slightly on the larger side of what I would want to see in this engine. But you know, it's always better to go a little bit looser versus being tight. For our intended use, that kind of measurement is going to work well, and it's going to work well with the weight pull that we're going to be running. So there you have it. You know, in my previous video, I did a breakaway torque test, and it was 12.4 foot-pounds to rotate the assembly. Now, the reason for that are these awesome skinny rings. Once upon a time, this would have been unheard of. What you're looking at is a 1mm, 1mm, 2mm oil ring. You know, back in the day, you know, when most pistons used like a 5/64 ring, you know, it wasn't uncommon to have breakaway torque values, you know, 30 to 40 foot-pounds. So it just goes to show you how piston technology has come a long ways, and you're freeing up a ton of power just by making these rings thinner, and they do just as good a job, if not better, because the ring can expand into the board. They're not confined. So just a little tech tip right there. If you have a chance to go to thinner rings, I highly advise you to do it. Okay, one of the last measurements that we're going to take is going to be our piston to cylinder bore clearance. I've already mic'd this piston, and it's coming in about 3/1000ths under 125. So basically it's 4.122 inches. So now what we're going to do is check the bore with the dial bore gauge and see what we get. I'm going to put you on the tripod right here while I get this set up. Yeah, let's see here. Let's see what we're looking at. Looks like we got about 3/1000ths there as well on the piston to wall clearance. Yep, dead on it. Which for this type alloy piston, which is a low expansion 4032, that's pretty much right where you need to be. And given that we're going to be going to a 2618, we may end up having to hone the cylinders to get the clearance where it needs to be for those new pistons, but that'll be something that we'll cross when the time comes. I've had people ask me questions about the block, and one of the hot topics is the amount of beef where the actual oil pump bolts to. As you can see here, it is pretty beefy there. You know, I don't have any issues with it at all. You know, all of our bearing clearances came in to 29/10,000ths to 3/1000ths of an inch. And for what we're doing, that is going to be absolutely perfect. You know, we've got, you know, 7/1000ths crankshaft in play. One thing that I am going to do when we send this thing to the machine shop is I'm going to have Eric and the guys check the line bore in this, and I'm going to upgrade the bolts in the mains. I know that they would probably be fine, but for my peace of mind, I'm wanting to put an AR piece bolt in it. We may do main studs, but I think a bolt would hold the power that we're definitely looking to make. So there you have it, folks. The mixed up boss has been torn down and is well on its way of getting those awesome Greg Brown cylinder heads mounted on top of this thing. So until next time, this is Andy from Unity Motorsports Garage. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, because I want everyone to see this thing get built and to see the kind of power that can be made on pump gas with a Boss style cylinder head. It's going to be phenomenal. So until next time, catch you later.